Hi, this is Dr. Friedlander, and in this lecture, I want to talk about assistive technology to support reading. And the reason why this is so important to understand is that there are estimates that anywhere from 15 to 20% of the population has a language-based learning disability, which is really huge when you think of it. So when we think about in the school, this usually translates to having a specific learning disability, which is one of the diagnoses or categories that child study teams used when they're writing IEPs and putting students into different categories. And one of the largest language-based learning disability is commonly known as dyslexia, and I'm sure you've worked with some students with it. But when we look at some of the stats nationwide, we're talking about probably 20% of elementary school population is struggling with reading, which is really huge. And it's really important when we look at outcomes, because 62% of non-readers usually wind up dropping out of high school. And many of them wind up in the criminal justice system or working in jobs that may be not commensurate with their abilities because of their difficulty in reading. The other thing to consider is the concept of comorbidity. And comorbidity means that if a student is diagnosed, for example, with dyslexia, it's often common for them to also have difficulties in the area of attention. There are statistics that show that anywhere maybe from 30 to 50% of students who are categorized with dyslexia may also have some form of ADHD. So it's important as a teacher to kind of monitor that and see how the student is doing in that particular arena. So with the reauthorization of the IDEA, so we had 2004, we had the reauthorization of IDEA, which was the special ed rules and regulations. And some of the outcomes that came as a result of that legislation was to assure that students with disabilities, with print disabilities, could have access to what we call accessible instructional materials. And what do we mean by accessible? Well, generally it means that it would allow them or the teacher to provide information in different ways. So presentation in different ways. And typically information or text could be, let's say, displayed on the screen, and then students could then have the text read aloud using the computer or iPad or tablet. And one of the important things is that these features would enable students to understand or comprehend information at a higher level. So that's important to consider. The other concept that was part of IDEA was the concept of a print disability. And it's important for you to understand, because these are actually sort of, in a sense, almost legal-like concepts. And if the student meets any of these criteria, then they would be considered having a print disability, which gives them access to different services, mostly, in many cases, digital text that they could then use to listen to information on a device. So these are the three categories. The first one is a significant motor disability. And these would be students that may have a neuromotor disability, such as cerebral palsy, or maybe traumatic brain injury from a car accident, and would have difficulty holding a book or turning the pages. The second group would be individuals who are visually impaired or blind, and then they would certainly meet the criteria. And the third criteria would be having a diagnosis of dyslexia or a reading disability. And if the student met any one of these criteria, then they would meet the criteria for a print disability. In the school, members of the child study team could complete the certification so that students could then access text in a different format.